This meeting is being live streamed. By sticking around, you consent to be live streamed.
I consent.
Tells me that every time. Okay, and now we're recording. Paul, it's good to see you. Paul, it's good to see you, and good to see the red ensign again.
Yes, thank you. I have my Father Christmas tie on.
Well, we can't see it.
Oh, sorry. My Father Christmas tie.
Well, that's awesome. I hope it's not made in China.
I'm afraid to look. I've had it for 20 years. Maybe in those days, they still actually made a few textiles in North America.
Bill, how you doing? Merry Christmas, everybody. It's Christmas Eve, and I'm in New Orleans. Bill in Los Angeles, and Paul up in Hamilton, Ontario. And my question for today is, it's Christmas all over the world. We are wishing everyone a white Christmas. What is the relationship, the ideal relationship between white people and all the other people of the earth?
Well, first of all, Christmas is very nice for us every year because we have a lot of children, and we generally get together for Christmas. We get together for other things as well, like sometimes Thanksgiving and other events. But this year, our entire family is here, all of my children and their spouses. And last night, even though it was the day before Christmas Eve, we had our traditional Messiah sing-along, where all my kids, or all my kids are pretty musical. So is my wife, and so we had a Messiah sing-along with our family, and that was really a typical thing that we do with a lot of heritage connected to that. Last year, we had an old time Christmas that my wife and I were in charge with. So we had chestnuts roasting on the fire. We had a goose, and we had we put oranges in the stockings, and I think a dollar bill in each, or a silver dollar in each of the stockings, to kind of mimic the way that the Christmas was celebrated, maybe in the 1800s. This year, my oldest daughter, who speaks Finnish, she's doing a Scandinavian Christmas, and they're all in the other room getting prepared with a traditional Scandinavian meal, and we're going to do the Father Christmas type events that they do in Finland and in Scandinavia. So I think all over the world, in the Christian world, they do Christmas like what we're doing, similar to that, except I did meet with a client just yesterday, and he was from Egypt, and his Coptic church or whatever, they celebrate Christmas on January 6th. So it's not December 25th like we do there. But when I lived in Japan, on Christmas Day, what they would do is they would serve cake, just a little bitty bit cake. And of course, all of the retailers try to get people to give presents in Japan. And it had not taken off when I was living in Japan. That was not a custom. Of course, they give presents all throughout the year for just when they visit people. But Christmas has been spread worldwide by the white people, and many cultures have adopted it. I'm sorry if I'm just rambling on, but that's my answer to your question.
I was in Japan just before Christmas 2 years ago, and it was humiliating. The Christmas lights, the Christmas trees, and businesses. While most of the signage would be, of course, in Japanese, there would be English, Merry Christmas. And up here in cultural Marxist Canada, many businesses would rather put an obscenity out than gag out Merry Christmas. It's season's greetings, or have a slap happy holiday or something like that. I was in admiration of how the Japanese have taken to it, and in disgust at how much of our establishment just detests the Christmas. They don't mind they call it holidays. But when somebody sends me a happy holiday card, if I'm in the mood, I bend it put it inside a Merry Christmas card and mail it back and said, you really think I'm celebrating holidays or a season? It's bloody cold here. I celebrate Christmas, and you know that. You do, because I happen to know you're a Catholic, so you know about it. You're a Catholic, you know about Christianity, you know about Christmas. If you respect me, send me a Christmas card. If not, don't.
I've noticed that the Christmas cards that I get from individuals generally have Christmas in them. The ones that I get from businesses, from accounting firms, from law firms, from support groups, support companies for lawyers and for real estate brokers, everything that's business related, it's unanimously happy holidays. And so, that's just the business culture that we deal with now. I don't know about you people, and it's probably the same, but my ancestors have celebrated Christmas for about probably 1,200 years, maybe 1,200 years. Before that, I think they were generally celebrating maybe the Odin version of paganism. And then before then, maybe they did that for maybe 1,000 years or so. But before that, for 40,000 years, they worshiped the fertility god, I guess personified by the Venus of Willendorf and various statuettes like that. And you'll find those statuettes very similar for 30,000 years throughout all of Europe and Central Asia. So I think that our ancient ancestors followed fertility cults. And maybe in light of our current population dearth of having children, maybe we should all embrace like Venus of Willendorf in addition to Christmas.
Venus of Willendorf would never make it as a Playboy centerfold.
Yeah.
If anything, her figure is strangely unattractive to the modern eye, and I mean, maybe that relates a little bit to the question of how should white people relate to the rest of the world, because her body type is pretty much only admired in the African population. What does that tell us, if anything? I mean, she has what's called steatopygia, and that seems to have been admired in ancient Europe.
What's steatopygia?
Excessive additions of fat on the buttocks.
Oh, okay, all right. I always assumed that it was to worship, I guess, or to promote fertility among the people that had that. And you don't see those statuettes in Africa. Yeah, back then you don't say anything in Africa, but you do see that in Europe and in Central Asia, where our peoples were. So I know this is getting off topic of Christmas, but maybe we should incorporate some of that into our modern society today.
Both sides of my family have celebrated Christmas, of course, for a very long time. The French Canadian part of my family would have a very, very rich, on New Year's Christmas Eve, a very rich meat pie called tourtière, which would be a mixture of ground beef and ground pork. It's quite delicious and quite filling. So they tuck into that after they came back from midnight mass, and then have a snooze and get up in the morning and prepare a more or less traditional Christmas. But what you were saying about the pre-Christian past, the winter solstice that occurs just around this time, the 21st of December. I was researching it for another program I was doing, and I discovered that was the beginning of the time of famine, because in Northern Europe, the winter months could be quite lean, because they have to slaughter most of the animals because they wouldn't have any way to feed them. But just about that time, there was one last big blowout feast. They probably had just killed a cow or several cows, and they had a really great feast. And as the old year died, and as the sun begins to climb again, the new year begins, but begins or began for them in difficult circumstances.
That's a good point. And that actually calls to mind something that makes me kind of retract what I said earlier, because my ancestors first came to America. They came to Boston in 1630s, and they were Puritans. And they were Puritans for many generations. I guess they were Puritans until they converted to Mormonism. And they did not celebrate Christmas because they thought Christmas was pagan, and celebrating Christmas was banned by my early ancestors, when they came to America. So now we've gone, I think, maybe 100 years ago or 70 years ago, there was full on celebration of Christmas. And now, like Charles said, or as you've said, Paul, they are not celebrating Christmas anymore. It's the season greetings issue. But for many generations, my ancestors did not celebrate Christmas because they thought it was too pagan.
Mm.
I just flashed, so to speak. The Venus of Willendorf appears since you mentioned her. Is she an ancestor we could be proud of?
I see what you mean, but like if we're dealing with a type of famine during the winter time that Paul is talking about, someone who has that kind of corpulence maybe survive the winter, and the rest of them wouldn't. So we got to take it with the time. But I see what you mean. Yeah, she's a little bit hefty for our current day society.
Hugh Hefner would never even consider her.
Well, I would lynch Hugh Hefner in a second.
Anyhow, I mean, it's an interesting point because I guess I've got both Puritan and Anglican ancestors, and so they would have argued about the celebration of Christmas. The Lincoln name, of course, arrived in Massachusetts with those Puritans, but it's interesting if you look at the early history of the colonies. The Church of England was still dominant, even in the northern colonies, and so I think that they probably had lots of arguments about how to celebrate Christmas. My understanding is that Charles Dickens' famous Christmas Carol was written in part to try to promote the pre-Puritan revival that was going on in England in the mid-19th century of how to celebrate Christmas in a more Shakespearean early Stuart manner.
Could it be? But now, Steve, I think it was probably in the 1730s or something, you had Handel write the Messiah. And although Handel was German, he lived in England, and he wrote it for an English population, and he wrote it, and it was immediately popular, and it's been popular ever since. And that Handel's Messiah, you cannot get much more really poignant Christmas celebration than doing that. And our family have had Messiah sing-alongs every Christmas Eve for decades, and it's been really good because it really gets you in the right spirit.
What part do you sing?
Well, they all make fun of me. All my family are all very musical, and even my daughters-in-law are quite musical. And my brother and sister were quite musical, and I wasn't. So I decided to marry a musician to have one up on them. So I married a musician, and it's done well for me. But I kind of turned the pages. I don't sing.
Oh my goodness. He that dwelleth in heaven shall laugh them to scorn. The Lord shall have them in derision.
Very good. One of my boys said, "Oh, we got to do, we love sheep." And they all laughed because it's, or we like sheep. And so he was just making that kind of a joke.
Well, I think kids all over the country do that. I mean, I was about to say that so we didn't exactly have an annual tradition of singing the Messiah, but we often did. And some of the neighborhood kids would say, "Oh, we like sheep. Oh, we like sheep."
Very good. I'm impressed. You've got a good singer and you can remember the words. Very good.
I could do. I won't turn this into a Messiah sing along, but yes, I love the Messiah.
Very good.
My favorite performance is Dublin. I think the 250th was in 1996. That was the 250th anniversary of.
Yeah, it was first performed in Dublin.
Yes,
and that surprised me that that all the Irish put it on. But yeah, good for them.
It was called the Church of Ireland. It was an Anglican church, basically set up by colonial England in Ireland. And I mean, again, this kind of gets back to our relationship to the world. First off, is Christianity for everybody? Deep question here.
That is a good point. Let's hear from Paul.
You're punting that down the field. Well, that's where I have a problem. It's a universalist religion, and I suppose it is. It may be open to all people, but I do think within Christianity there has to be segregation. That's my feeling.
Let me give you my take on that. I used to tour the United States on radio and television and before the internet with a black nationalist by the name of Robert Brock, and he was a Back to Africa black nationalist. And he said something that really brought to my attention. He says, Christianity is really the only truly ecumenical religion that attracts everybody. Everybody joins the Christian church. And he says, I'm a free will Baptist minister, and I'm a Back to Africa man, but I'm a minister. And Christianity invites everybody. And he says, Mr. Johnson, that's going to destroy the white race. And so, that's what, as he said to me, and I said, in many respects, he's right. If we do have segregation, then maybe it can work out. But Christianity today is so embracing of everybody that it's like Robert Brock said, it's going to destroy the white race.
Yes, I'm perhaps not the biggest force behind massive third world immigration, but certainly a powerful force enabling it and sheltering the illegals are the various churches, particularly the Catholic Church, and this puts them in fundamental opposition to the best interests of our race, in my opinion.
Yeah.
What can we do? Because I mean, as I said, my upbringing is Anglican, even if I've got Puritan ancestors, and the church I go to because it is such a historic place. Trinity Church on Jackson Avenue is the oldest standing Protestant church in the Mississippi Valley. It is currently celebrating its 175th anniversary as a building, over 220 years as a congregation. And it's the 175-year-old building, all the stained glass windows put in after the Civil War, and they all celebrate Confederate heroes. The main reredos behind the altar is dedicated to Bishop Leonidas Polk, who died as a martyr defending the entrance to Atlanta. he was the first bishop of Louisiana. He was a missionary bishop for the entire Louisiana Purchase. And,
Oh, wow.
and as a matter of fact, he created the church where my grandmother was baptized in Natchitoches, Louisiana. And this is an amazing Confederate monument, this church I go to. And the congregation to this day is 100% white, but the clergy is constantly trying to integrate it. I think that they go down to East New Orleans and Shanghai Black people to drag them in. And they pay Black readers to do the gospel, and not the gospel, that has to be a priest, but the Old Testament and second readings on occasion. And they are desperately promoting racial justice in this Confederate monument. It's basically a fascinating experience, because the congregation, I sit usually either right behind or just to the side of the Breckinridge family. I don't know if you have the memory of the 1860 election map in your head, but
He was vice president.
he was the vice president who got the second largest number of electoral votes after Abraham Lincoln. Solid South.
Yeah.
And that's his descendant, sitting right by Charles Lincoln.
Oh, wow. Oh, I see. Well, fun. Well, what can we do? I think that I've noticed that in America, at least among our movement, the paganism is receiving a resurgence. You have the Asatru Folk Assembly, you have Odinism, you have others that are embracing pre-Christian religions. And when one of my kids was in school, there was a family from Norway who was going to our little elementary school, and I met them. In fact, when they went back to Norway, they gave their bicycles to our kids, because we had bikes, but they didn't know what to do with them, so they gave them to our kids. But I was talking to him. I says, "Oh, you're from Norway? You know what's becoming big in America now? It's the Odinist movement, the pre-Christian religion." And he said, "Mr. Johnson, that's stupid." And so I thought, even it was his ancestors that had that religion, and he thought it was stupid. So I thought, well, it's got a long ways to go before it has traditional becomes cachet in America.
Paul, how do you feel about the Odinists and I don't know what I mean. I know exactly one person who adheres to Roman religion and one person who adheres to Greek religion, and everybody else is sort of an Odinist. But is Odinism in any way productive? I mean, what heritage? You mentioned no, Bill mentioned Odinism as his ancestors, but what do we actually have by way of Odinist heritage?
Well, I was associated with a group of Odinists that met in Toronto in the 1970s. Their leader was a woman named Ilse Christensen. She later moved to the United States and ended up back in Canada, but she was a lifelong Odinist. It was more a spiritual thing than say worshiping the Norse gods. It wasn't so much that as a philosophy, more in tune with nature. I guess that might be the best way to put it. It was quite philosophical, and remember, this is the 1970s, and we meet on the four the solstices and the equinoxes, and they would always serve mead, and the reason I date it is that mead was appallingly horrible. Just undrinkable swill. I've had mead since. It wouldn't be one of my favorites, but I don't know, maybe what they were making in Ontario back then wasn't very good. But yes, I'd say it was more spiritual, or I should say philosophical, and they're interesting people. And I've been in touch on and off with the Asatru people. In fact, we had Mr. McNallen speak for us over about 25 years ago. It was a famous meeting. The ARA tried to break it up, and there was some smashed windows and much pushing and shoving, and but the meeting went on. But I guess that's not much of an answer. But I think we should be open to it.
Well, I talked to one some time ago, and he said, Mr. Johnson, your God, the Christian God's image, the icon, is your God is nailed to a cross. Our religious image is our God carries a hammer. So that's everything you need to know about the two.
I thought you were going to say something much more vulgar. I date a woman who is vile. She grew up a Catholic, and I guess she feels like the Catholics abused her when she was growing up. And she says, "Why do you worship a Jew on a stick?" That's extreme blasphemy. That is vulgar, and yet it's also an interesting psychological thing. And yet, here's the thing. And this was the question I was asking. Bill started out by talking about the Messiah, Handel's Messiah. Handel's Messiah it's like the Sistine Chapel. It's a monument to the West, or maybe it's more appropriate. It's like St. Paul's or Westminster Cathedral. It is a monument to the culture of the British Isles, to the civilization that our ancestors created. There is nothing of comparable value that we can say has come down to us from Odinism. The Icelandic sagas are something I love. I think they're wonderful literature, but they're really rather marginal in terms of what we can trace as living parts of our culture.
Well, I think you're right about the living part, but the truth to tell, the pre-Christian religion was brutally persecuted as the church gained strength in Europe. So what they might have had has not really come down to us. The pre-Christian religion was still active in rural areas in parts of the Baltic states up into the 17th century, but in much of the rest of Europe, I mean, it had been obliterated, and so it might not be fair to compare its legacy to Christianity with the beautiful cathedrals and music, etc.
Well, I mean, the only thing is that we do have the remnants of Roman and Greek religion. We have immense both literary and architectural and artistic relics of those civilizations, and yet the people who try to revive Greek and Roman religion really have a pretty much insuperable barrier. I'm not quite sure why Odinism has been so much more popular, but I guess it has something to do with Heinrich Himmler and the Third Reich and all that.
Well, just as Paul mentioned that the paganism religion was obliterated many centuries ago, we're seeing similar things happening now to the Christian religion, such as the Happy Holidays instead of Merry Christmas. But a few years ago, I was in Las Vegas on a Sunday, and I wanted to go to church, and I saw that there was a church service in the hotel, and it was a church service. There was a 3-day political gathering by what's called the Daily Cause, DAILYCKOS, and it was kind of a left-wing political group. So
They're,
um,
they're a nasty bunch. They've written about me.
yeah, well, you had to pay money to send this 3-day seminar, but I was just there for Sunday, so I went and I says, hey, you guys have a church service going on. I'd like to attend a church service. So they gave me a badge for free. So I go sit in the church service. So I sat in the room and listened to the church service, and they had Muslims speak. They had Odinism, and then they had Wiccan speak, witchcraft speak. They had Jews speak. They had speeches from atheists. They had a lot of different speeches. But guess which religion? I did a Buddhist speech, but guess which religion was completely omitted?
Christianity.
Christianity. And so it just shows that there is a widespread obliteration going on. And why is it? Because the left hates us. They hate everything that we've done and everything that we stand for. And that's just their little way of pushing us out of the central of society.
And unfortunately, I can't speak about the United States, but certainly Canada. During the medical Stalinism that we've been through the last 2 years, for periods of time, no gatherings were permitted. So churches in a number of Canadian provinces were closed. There was basically no Christmas last year. There was no Easter this year. But the active collaboration of the mainline Christian churches, the passivity, it was appalling. The government got no grief from these people. The only rebels were some fundamentalist pastors, several of whom were thrown in jail in Alberta. Pastor I know, I'm not a member of his church, but Pastor Henry Hildebrand in Aylmer, Ontario, just kind of about 60 miles west of me, his church was padlocked. So the congregation could not gather because they gathered anyway. And that, in my opinion, should have been the attitude of the mainstream churches. I think the injunction from the Bible, as I understand it, is that the people of God meet together, and it's not private. I don't watch TV and praise God. We meet as a community and worship God. And in my opinion, that's non-negotiable. Now, they might have said, well, look, we'll have 2 services instead of 1, so we can spread people out a little bit. We'll meet you part way, but no way are we canceling it. We just aren't. And when I think of the resistance that Christianity, but particularly the Catholic Church, gave to the communists in Eastern Europe, in the end, they gave up. In Poland, essentially, the Communist Party said, look, the church is they're just too committed. We'll do an accommodation with them. Certainly in my country, they're a laughing stock how weak and impotent and useless the mainstream churches are.
See, the benefit that I see is, you to get together to worship, to congregate to worship. There's something wholesome and beneficial about congregating together each week to make yourself a better person, regardless of what the religion is, regardless of what the beliefs are, just religion itself. You get together to reflect and make yourself a better person. And when America was strongest, was when we did that on a regular basis. When I was a kid, when we went to school, we said a prayer before class. Everybody said a prayer, and it was in the name of Jesus Christ. And if you didn't like it, that was kind of too bad. But everyone back then basically was Christian. There was just a few outliers that weren't, and it was not a big deal. But they've taken prayer out of the classroom. They've taken God out of the classroom, and they're taking God out of the churches, and we're reaping the whirlwind. You sow, what is it called? You sow the wind and you reap the whirlwind, and we're seeing just a whirlwind of destruction coming through Western society because we've abandoned religion.
I heard a very kind of on point, touching story earlier today. A good friend of mine, or actually one of my employees, is quite disabled because of various illnesses, and her maid sounds too grand, but a woman who helped her with the housework I was a very committed Christian of a small group. I'm not sure what they are, but they're fundamentalist Christian, fundamentalist Protestant, and they continue to meet. And twice in the last few months, the pastor has come around and visited my friend. She's not a member of the church. That reaching out for people who are alone, I mean, the lockdowns that we've experienced. Sure, they're not as bad as in the United States, but it's made many people very, very lonely. Like in old folks' homes last year, in most provinces, you couldn't visit your own relatives. So, I mean, if Granny didn't get COVID and die, she probably died from loneliness. It's a horrible thing. And, I really have no end of admiration for those really believing Christians who do reach out to people. And I think the mainline churches are, I think our enemy has taken the full measure of them. Don't have to worry about them.
Yeah, but see, before this globalism embraced the world, when we'd get together and congregate, it would be with our cousins, with our neighbors, with our family, with our own race of people. And now they're trying to embrace and bring in everybody. And it's become a globalist love fest. Yeah. And it's to the detriment of Western civilization. So just like Black nationalist Robert Brock said, and as Charles Lincoln was mentioning, that type of globalist concept of Christianity is really wreaking havoc on our own people's future.
No, I think your Black friend was absolutely dead on with his prediction.
Yeah.
Here's a point, an interesting conundrum. In my subtitle for today, I said, wishing everyone a white Christmas, even in South Africa. Who was the leader for the whole world when Nelson Mandela was in jail? It was Anglican Archbishop Desmond Tutu. He was free to travel the world and basically beat the drum for the destruction of South Africa. And that seems to be the model that they set and that they're building for the rest of the world. And I'd like your thoughts about that.
In that situation, who turned against South Africa? Was it the Muslims in Iran? Was it the Chinese in China or the Japanese? No, it was the white people out to destroy their own people. And so it's that we call it now woke culture now, are these virtue signaling whites, but it was a cancer that was really prevalent during that era. Everybody that I grew up with, they wanted to end apartheid. And what they wanted to do is virtually destroy the white people in South Africa. And now 50 years later, it continues unabated. And we're going to have to change that mindset or we don't have a future.
Yeah, you're right. I had an experience a few years ago where the Antifa had a picket at my home in a fairly nice suburb of Port Credit, Ontario. Many of my neighbors turned against me. I didn't know them very well, but I didn't lose any lifelong friends or anything. I don't want to dramatize it, but the attitude was, well, what did he do to provoke these people? Well, I mean, these people are such utter scumbags. They never be, in general, be in that type of neighborhood. But the attitude was, well, he must have done something wrong. Anyway, they have put leaflets around the neighborhood that I was a Nazi, et cetera, et cetera. But I was thinking, supposing I and a couple of people decided to go up to a Negro neighborhood and we had a beef with some guy and said he was a communist or something, the people in that neighborhood would immediately turn against us. They wouldn't even care what the issue was. You're in the wrong neighborhood, people. Then they would say, he's one of our brothers. We don't know much about him, but you're attacking him. We're on his side. Whereas many of my neighbors, I mean, the ones that expressed an opinion, they didn't immediately say, well, what are what's this garbage on two hoofs doing in our neighborhood? Get them out of here. No, they thought I must be in the wrong. And that's the difference with the mindset. And you're right. It's fatal. I hear almost nothing from the mainstream churches about what's happening or has happened to whites in South Africa. No problem. I don't even hear much. I hear almost nothing from the churches about what's happened to the Christian minority in Iraq. It's of no interest. That you're those who you should be close to, you're not. Meanwhile, the Christian churches are all in a lather, or at least some of them are, how they're going to help the people in Haiti. I think former President Trump had it exactly right. And I know that from personal experience. I've been there. It's a shithole.
Yeah. Well, Charles, I've got a whole bunch of Christmas Eve events going on that are starting, and they're waiting for me to begin. So I'm wondering if, I don't know how long you're planning on carrying this out, but
let's go on a few more minutes. I wanted to remind you that a couple of years ago, you suggested that we draft up a proposal for colonizing Haiti and turning it into the first white ethno state. And this goes back to my question that maybe we should pick up on New Year's Eve or something, but let's just talk about it for a few minutes. What is our best strategy about relating to the rest of the world? Because everybody else is so concerned with what white people ought to do for the rest of the world. And so I think that one key element of a white revival, so to speak, to bring a white prominence has to be, we have to basically shoulder what I believe it was Rudyard Kipling called the white man's burden. And we have to reestablish our leadership in the entire world so that people like Desmond Tutu don't have it.
yeah, I agree with that, because the white man's burden means that we are the leader of the world, and we have to protect and promote our own people. Other peoples admire us for what we've done in the past, but they hate us now. Why? Because we've abandoned the mantle of self-preservation. We have to support ourselves and do what is best for Western civilization, and then the rest of the world will admire us. If we hate ourselves, the rest of the world will hate us. So yes, we need to reestablish white ethnostates, not one, but many. And we need to say, okay, we want to preserve our people. We want to ban interracial marriage. We want to have whites, or encourage whites to have children, and discourage non-whites from having children because there's too many of them. And we need to have a balance. And we don't have a balance now. There was more of a balance, 50, 60 years ago, and we need to get it back. We will not be admired on the world stage until we promote our own interests.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Nobody respects weakness. It invites contempt. It invites, of course, people to try to take advantage of it. But it doesn't. It doesn't create respect. And the world respected whites when they showed respect for themselves. Up until I guess maybe around the Second World War or just after that, Britain had an empire that stretched around the globe, and people wanted to be British. Like there's nobody more British than an Anglo-Indian. An upper-class Indian has a good English accent, affects a lot of British manners and so on. They looked up to the British colonialists. They saw they had something valuable, and they saw that they were proud of themselves. That they weren't racked with self-doubt and so on. At least maybe this gets a little into devious undercurrents, but probably at least until the beginning of the 20th century, and that was only at the top. But Britain conveyed an attitude of confidence. Of course, we're the best. There's no doubt about it. I sensed that when I was in Southwest Africa, they call it Namibia now, that many of the natives still speak German, because even though the Germans were only had it as a colony for
30 years.
About 30 years, they saw their confidence and what they had so impressed the native people. This was something we want to be part of. We see its superiority, but part of that is not going around beating your breast and saying we're the best, but you show it. And that's what we don't have anymore. When I think of Obama's foreign policy, what's he trying to spread around the world? Some sort of mawkish democracy and LGBTQ rights. Well, that's a winner. Most of the rest of the world is still has its head sufficiently screwed on right that they know there are only two sexes, men and women, and there isn't a third, fourth, or 25th. They get that when they see what's supposed to be a superior culture so mixed up and lost. There's no respect.
Well, how about we get back together next week for New Year's Eve and talk a little bit more about this stuff? Can you two come back at this time?
I can. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, let's
see.
And have a very Merry Christmas, Bill and Charles.
Yes. Merry Christmas to all of you.
And very merry and very white.
Very good.
Yes.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Good night, everybody. See you next week.
Okay.
Right.
Good night. Good night, Paul.